Hey Dan, what are we talking about today?
In a rush today?
Nope, I just wanted to make sure that I ask you before you try that question on for size again.
No worries. It didn't suit me anyways. Today we're talking about vacations versus vacation homes, timeshares, and then the risk of leaving the office behind and starting to work from home.
Welcome to the Science of Wealth, where we discuss the science behind financial planning and the art of learning and applying it. Okay, and getting away again. You got a vacation coming up? You going somewhere?
I am also taking advantage of the unlimited PTO policy, thinking of some things down the line. I don't even own a home yet, however, so the vacation home versus vacation thing is merely just a thought and something I think comes up with some of the older families that already have a primary residence and are thinking about branching out, maybe buying some more real estate or just traveling a little bit more.
Okay, so I mean, let's start this off here. We're talking about just the vacations versus vacation homes. So, do you want to start on the vacation side of this coin or the home side of this coin?
I want to start on the home side. I think there's some families we speak with who go somewhere and they might go there a few times and realize they really enjoy spending time there and then come to us and say, what do you think about buying an apartment or a piece of property in that area?
Yeah, so I think a vacation home is fine in certain sense. So the core thing that I always bring up with a client before we even talk about the specifics of like a condo, a cabin, a beach house, whatever it is going to be essentially focused around just the question of, do you want to vacation in that particular place essentially for the rest of your life? And I highlight that specific element of the kind of cost of the vacation and the desire to vacation that particular place for the rest of their lives, because once you've sunk several $100,000 into a particular place, you're forever going to have sort of a compulsion to utilize it, and you're always going to be making a trade-off evaluation of like, well, we would love to go to Italy, but we have this beach house, or we'd love to go to the UK, but we have this cabin in the mountains. And every time you're evaluating your vacations, your trips, your getaways, you're always going to have to think about it as, do I want to go to the place? And it could be a very special place, a very, very wonderful place. It's not to say that your vacation home is bad by any means, but you're always going to be making an evaluation of, do I want to go to that place or do I want to do something new? And when you first buy your vacation home, your cabin, whatever, you're going to be super excited about it. It's going to be the coolest thing ever. You're probably not only going to buy it, you're going to furnish it, you're going to decorate it, you're going to spend a ton of time there. It's going to be great. But is it going to stay great for the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, depending on how early you've bought this place? And are you going to want to spend all of your trips and vacations there going forward? So that's always my big first question is, do you want sort of the obligation to utilize the asset for yourself to make it worthwhile for you long term?
Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me, and especially if it's an area you're familiar with and have been and know you enjoy. I know something you discuss and bring up with families too is spending time there and becoming familiar with the area prior to making a permanent purchase. Can you speak about that a little bit more?
Yeah, so the big thing there, and I recommend this in a lot of mediums. I think, if you're going to retire, before you retire, you should take a month off. And the key thing there is not take a vacation or a trip somewhere. Just like take a month off and putter around your house for a month and see how that feels. Because that's going to be the majority of your time in retirement, as opposed to like a big fancy trip to Rome or something. But then on the other side of that, if you want to relocate, you say, I'm going to retire in Florida or Texas or California or wherever it is, I'm going to move somewhere else for whatever reason, I think it behooves you to spend a little extra time there before you make that move permanent. Because, it's one thing to just rent an apartment or an Airbnb or even stay in a hotel for a month. It'll be expensive, but that's not valuable knowledge for you versus selling your house, uprooting your entire life, moving your entire life and all your possessions and everything to a different place, only to find out that you really loved it in the summer, but you hate it in the winter. right? Or that you thought that you really really love Cuban food or whatever the local cuisine is, but like after a month of it, you're kind of sick of it. So it just really helps just take a little bit of time to do your recon on it beforehand, particularly when it comes back to the vacation home idea versus the permanent relocation idea, because not only is there's this kind of constant we're going to have to keep coming back over and over thing that goes into it, but also you're going to have to evaluate the fact of whether it's going to be just for you, making it a very expensive luxury item for yourself, or whether it's going to be a financial asset where you're going to rent it when you're not using it, and all the factors and considerations that go into whether it's a place that you love or whether it's a place lots of people love and it's going to actually be viable as a financial asset.
Okay. It does it make more sense potentially if you can monetize it and use it as a maybe a rental and spend a few weeks there, almost have your cake and eat it too?
For almost everybody, yes. I mean, just flat out, right? This is the difference between having a two, three, $4,000 mortgage, HOA insurance, property tax bill every month that you have to pay out of pocket, or having even just a subsidized one. Because if you boil it down, let's say you buy a beach house and it's costing you all in $4,000 a month to own that property. That means you're spending $48,000 a year on a vacation that you may not even take. So then the ability to use it as a financial asset and have it either pay for itself or at least subsidize that out of pocket cost is enormous. Because if you think about, even if it's $1,000 a month, $2,000 a month, $3,000 a month, you can do a lot with 12, 24, 36, $48,000 a year, right? And when we're getting up to that $40,000 a year, now we're talking about first class flights anywhere in the world, a month to stay anywhere in the world for the same amount of money, realistically, and potentially even in a very nice, high quality luxury sort of environment. So, is this cabin, is this beach house, is this condo in Breckenridge, whatever it is, the actual thing that you need in your life to enjoy from a vacation standpoint? And if we can get it to pay for itself, terrific, because we both get potentially cash flow and potentially also appreciation on the value of it, or at least we're building a cash reserve to help pay for future repairs, upkeep, maintenances, whatever is required for this property. But if it's just a standalone box, in the woods on a beach somewhere that only we own, only we use, it's a very expensive luxury. And at that point, I'm often going to be pointing a client to say, look, unless you're going to go up to the Breckenridge condo every single weekend during ski season to get the most use out of it, or at least if you're not going to spend several weeks out of the year there, then frankly you're just better off spending $5,000-$10,000 to vacation somewhere, even the exact same place you want to buy something, because it's going to be cheaper for you than it is to actually own the thing there.
Okay, and this might be a stretch, but do you think that can be a useful strategy for the try the place out before you spend all your time there? Is, you buy a place and if you don't like it and it's in a popular area, you just rent it forever and now have a property? Or if you do like it, you move there.
Yes, but I think there's also a lot of regulatory risk in these types of assets, just real estate in general, but particularly like short-term rentals. There's a big difference between like buying a single-family home and renting it out for 12-month leases versus buying a single-family home or a condo and then trying to rent it out, via Airbnb or VRBO. You're seeing a lot more regulation in certain geographies around licensing, permitting, taxes. You're seeing more and more burdens placed on owners of these types of properties. And you have big events. So you look at a place like New York City, which essentially banned short-term rentals, where quite literally the amount of short-term rentals on the market and the number of properties on the market in the New York City area changed by like tens of thousands of units overnight. And that sort of event, if you were saying, oh, this makes sense if I can Airbnb it and VRBO it, but if it doesn't make sense if I can't do that, well, just by the stroke of a pen from some city council members or a governor or senator or whatever it is, right, might put you in a position where suddenly your financial asset is a financial albatross. And so it really becomes important to recognize that there's no risk-free asset. It doesn't matter that, oh, it's a tangible property, it'll always be worth something. Yes, but right, you have the potential regulatory risks, and then you also just have the liability factor, right? You bought before you stayed there, you realize you don't want to spend a lot of time there, but you want to keep it as an asset. Well, that's fine. But if you're going to have, let's say, 120 people coming through this property every year, you've got to think about your slips, trips, and falls risks that go with any property, and how much insurance costs you and how much liability there potentially is, depending on the nature of the property, right? Does the property have a pool? Does it have a hot tub? What if somebody drowns in it? So there's a lot of things like that people sort of gloss over and don't want to think about because we tend to want to avoid negative thoughts and the what ifs of negativity. But for something that was just supposed to be your little getaway spot, financializing it again is a very valuable way of making that much more affordable for you, but it carries real risks.
All that said, it seems like you're team vacation over vacation home then.
I'm very much of that spirit of like variety is the spice of life. I think the amount of things you can do in the world is beyond counting. And so, like, don't get me wrong, I've been to a lot of getaways, cabin homes. We have clients who've built beach houses and have cool cabins up in the mountains. Like, there's a lot of really cool stuff out there that people do want to own or build and make their own. But I'm the type of person who's always going to look at the world and say, there's so much world to go see. There's so many things to go experience. Why do the same thing over and over and over again? That's my personal bias. There's somebody out there for whom the cabin in the mountains is their dream, and nothing will ever change that.
Okay, and I think you can make a really good argument for both. But let's think about a family that has 4 kids. How are they going to be able to go on vacation, and how easy is that potentially compared to maybe having a cabin in the woods or a beach house they could take their family to every summer?
Yeah, I think that improves the calculus. There's always this issue that's not a one size fits all thing. Back to the cabin being the perfect thing for that one person. For a family with 4 kids, where that many more plane tickets, that many more hotel rooms, that much bigger of a rental car, etc., is a big burden, right? The family getaway, the little place by a lake out in Nebraska, whatever it is, might be the perfect fit for them. Where yeah, it's expensive, right? It's a luxury item to them in the same way that we've already discussed, but that's still cheaper than trying to fly the whole family to Japan one year and then down to Argentina another year and so on. So there's definitely variations in personal preference here. But I'm thinking about this mostly in the context of just the financial good of the individual or the individual, kind of family, just the couple itself. And so even when you think about like the kids are there, but that's probably call it a 15 to 25 year question. And if we're talking about buying something, let's say when we're 30, this is going to be an awesome getaway, right? We have some great friends here in the business community who have rental properties and cabins up in the Red Feather area, and they go there all the frickin' time, right? Like their raison d'etre is they work to be able to afford to go back to Red Feather, right? And so that's wonderful for them. They've it's a multi generational property. They've raised their kids there. Their kids now have kids. Their grandkids are not going to the place. There's a lot of things like that that a family property or a personally held property can provide. But I do just come back to sort of the concentration risk of spending all your time in one particular place, both financially, but also just from a quality of life standpoint. Again, there's always going to be a specific getaway that's the right fit for the right person or the right family. I'm just always going to hedge on the side of variety being favorable to specificity here.
Okay, based off of how this conversation's went thus far, I think I have an inclination as to how you will answer the next topic here, which is your take on timeshares. Let's speak about it.
I'm going to go with the sort of old expression here. You can't be half pregnant. And timeshares are the vacation home example of being half pregnant. You've decided to commit to the financial obligation and the ongoing maintenance costs and risks and liabilities, but without the ownership. It's perfect. In a particular sense, this is supposed to be sort of the cheaper entry point to something like owning the beach house or something. Hey, I'm only paying for 1/52nd of the beach house instead of the whole beach house, but you get almost none of the upside. The reputation of the contracts, right? They're notoriously bad and tough and brutal on the people who hold them. And then just generally speaking, same issues around variety. Like, oh, we're going to go to the Polynesian at Disney World every single year for the rest of our lives. And like, I'm sure the Disney Polynesian is super cool and whatnot, but like, I've been to French Polynesia. It too is pretty cool.
Okay, and I don't have a timeshare. I don't know anybody, to my knowledge, that owns a timeshare. But you said it's like owning a portion of the vacation per se, 1/52nd of it, so say 1 week a year. But it's cheaper, so almost wouldn't it be nice to have a timeshare somewhere you like to go, say, consistently, and then also maybe expand and be able to go to Polynesia?
Balancing both the flexibility question and the financial question, I still maintain it's kind of the worst version because you have the ongoing obligation, you have what is often a substantial cost. Part of this, like we assume that, oh, it's 1/52nd the cost, but often what people do is they just price up in that. They go like, well, I could afford a $2,000 a month cabin in the woods somewhere if I owned it completely, or I could afford $2,000 a month for a fancy condo in Miami or something, wherever the particular timeshare that we're talking about is. So then it's not necessarily cheaper. Number one, a lot of people overspend on it because what they can get is nicer than what they can afford on their own. That's sort of the key piece. It's like, wow, I've got this beautiful luxury penthouse sort of place somewhere on a gorgeous beach or in Hawaii or something. But then we've now just spent just as much, and now we don't have any of the equity upside on this thing. We maintain all the ongoing risks, and also it's much harder to financialize. A lot of these places will not let you resell or re-rent to third parties in a way that helps you offset the costs. So we not only have an obligation, albeit maybe less of a time obligation, but potentially we may have just as much financial obligation without any of the particular upsides, as well as the part where if I want to sell my cabin, or if I want to sell my beach house or my condo, I can probably just do that by calling up a realtor, getting them to list it, and getting it sold. But getting out of a timeshare can often literally require legal counsel to the point of absurdity.
Okay. Doesn't sound very appealing, but out of curiosity, is there any situation or silver lining or benefit for a timeshare and someone that might be useful for?
I mean, all the examples that I just gave, where when I say you can own 1/52nd of like a penthouse in Miami, gets you really excited, like, sure, then fine. Like, if that's actually appealing to you, if that's what you actually want, more power to you. And at the end of the day, my focus here is if a client is asking for my opinion, those are my concerns. And those concerns to me personally would definitely outweigh the desire to ever own something like a timeshare. But for the right person in the right situation, same as the cabin, same as the beach house, all of those examples from before, if a timeshare fits your particular needs and lifestyle and wants, go for it. I'm just going to say caveat emptor because timeshares, again, are just notoriously tough on people who want to get out of them later in life. So it's a big commitment you're making, and often you're paying quite a bit for the privilege and later for the pain.
It almost seems like a better alternative, if you want that penthouse in Miami, is just to rent an Airbnb for a week, much less commitment, and you don't have to go year after year, and you can still get something that may be above your regular style and way of living, but not make it binding.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue there is that, like anything that's done a la carte, that's probably more expensive on a day by day basis. But we have none of the ongoing obligations. From a lifetime standpoint, it's cheaper. But if the hypothetical, put it this way, if I'm a timeshare salesperson, my argument is going to be like, well, yeah, you can spend $12,000 a year with us to have your timeshare for a week every year, 2 weeks a week, every year, or you can spend $15,000 every year going somewhere new and fancy, and it's probably not that much better. So why don't you save money by spending $12,000 a year with us in perpetuity instead of a la carte renting something every year?
Okay. Not interested, but maybe for somebody. I mean, it seems like the salesmen get enough people and do well enough that someone's interested in it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. But also, I think like a lot of high commission things, and there's whole documentaries on this industry. Just because there are willing buyers willing to pay the price doesn't mean that the buyers are doing well. Or I think, as my favorite example of this goes, just because there's a lot of demand for meth and heroin doesn't mean that meth and heroin are good for you.
Well said. All right. Well, moving on a little bit, let's talk about working from home. We've seen articles and had experiences with some folks getting laid off or having to move to new jobs because, during COVID, they started to transition to working from home and working online. And now companies are saying, well, we'd like you back in person. But people make permanent decisions based on working from home and not having to make that commute anymore. Is this a real risk and thing people should be considering? Is the potential of having to go back to the office after making a permanent move?
I'm going to give every lawyer's favorite answer. It depends, Daniel.
Why does it depend, Dan?
Oh, you had to make me explain it. So here's the thing, and let's just frame this conversation for a second here. I'm an employer, right? So I make the rules. I get to decide whether the team works remotely or doesn't work remotely, and I get get to make that decision for myself and so on. I think the correct answer here is not so much that it makes sense or doesn't make sense to work from home, or doesn't make sense or doesn't make sense to require people to come back to the office, so much as a question of what are you incentivizing and what does it actually matter to you. So I'll give the example here. Here in our firm, we have a remote work policy that essentially says if you want to work remotely and it makes sense to work remotely, go for it. Right. So, like, if you, Daniel, don't have any client meetings, any reason to physically be in the office whatsoever, and you have the setup at home with the extra monitors and the base station and all that, why commute? Why bother? So, stay home, get your work done. But the core there is that the emphasis on working from home then is not that you will sign onto your computer by 9 o'clock and that you shouldn't sign out any earlier than 5. The emphasis is what work do you have to do and are you getting it done? And the focus around that then is, hey, if you only have, let's say, 3 hours of work to do at home and then you're done, and you're completely caught up on everything, and there's nothing else to do, you should probably just take the afternoon off, right? You should probably just make that time for yourself and enjoy it in some way, shape, or form versus pretending to work for the whole 8 hours. And conversely, for me as the employer, as the manager in this hypothetical, it's my responsibility to keep you busy enough that I get the value of that time back from you, that you have enough stuff to do and tasks to accomplish and projects ongoing and so on, that if you slacked off too much from home and didn't actually take the time and just pretended to work for 8 hours versus getting stuff done, that you would actually fall behind in a noticeable way. Because alternatively, what we're incentivizing when we say, work from home versus be in the office and all the things, what we're incentivizing is time spent. And there's no direct correlation between time spent other than the actual physical reality of I have to spend some time on a task to get it done. But if I'm saying, hey, what matters to me is that I see you working in the office 8 hours, or I see that you're online from 9 to 5 when you work remotely, and when I ping you, you respond to me very quickly to prove to me that you're on your computer and working. I'm not incentivizing productivity. I'm not incentivizing results. And I can spend a ton of time in a chair. I can watch a lot of YouTube. I can read really slowly. I can putter around and make up. Trust me, this is the bane of every financial planner's life. I can just waste a bunch of time creating a custom spreadsheet for some reason that I don't actually need for any real purpose. Like, I can find ways to occupy time, but what matters is the actual creation of value for clients, the creation of results and projects and completion of things, and that's what matters the most. So, to bring all this back into your core question, when we think about all these companies saying come back in person, the argument in many cases has been we're losing out on culture. We're losing out on collaboration. We're losing out on the productivity of our team because what we think is happening is they're sitting in their pajamas and they're fucking off all day. That's what we think. And so we don't know of any way to incentivize them to not fuck off all day. So our best solution is to put them in a place where we can physically watch them. That to me is a leadership and management failure more than it is a statement about worker productivity.
I used to have a buddy, and he had a job that I thought was quite demanding, and he was able to work from home. And every once in a while, he'd spend the night at my place, and I'd watch him log on to quote unquote work at 9 in the morning. And he had this little system where he'd move the mouse every X minutes, and as long as that happened, it looked like he was active. And I'm not saying that's what people working from home are doing, but what you're saying, to clarify, is that that is the employer's fault because they're not giving him enough work if he simply has completed what he needs to do and isn't just messing around for the sake of being lazy.
Yeah, and I can think of particular examples. For example, when I worked back at IBM, at one point I was responsible for a transition project, and we were taking essentially all of these PowerPoints and slide decks from one of the trainers, and we said, hey, as part of transitioning this program from your company to our company, we're going to need you to validate all of the information in your training decks. And bear in mind, this person is every 2 weeks taking a new class of trainees through the same training, like every other week, new people, same slides, new people, same slides. And we're just saying, hey, as you hand this off to us, we want you to validate it. If you can get that done for us in the next 4 weeks, since you don't have any trainees coming through now, there's a hiring freeze on that team. If you can get that done in the next 4 weeks, and their response is immediately just this oh, it's going to take me way longer to validate all this stuff and make sure it's going to work. And this dude managed to drag it out for 14 weeks. And I was not in a position as the project manager for this particular activity. I wasn't in a position to just say, like, that's bullshit. Fucking get it done. I had to just go back to my manager and be like, seriously? The manager's like, look, just let it happen. But that guy was just milking a task and saying, oh, even though I take these exact same slides every single week, 26 weeks or 26 times a year and train people on them, I'm not sure if they're right. And it's going to take me months to figure out whether they're actually right. That's something where managers often replace understanding of what their employees do with arbitrary metrics of productivity, like being in the office 40 hours a week. Right. So in the context of something like your friend being able to say, like, look, I just jiggle my mouse and there's like literally mouse jiggling devices now and programs that'll just do this for you. So you can, if you're doing it well enough, you can actually just disappear more. But what that really says is that the management doesn't actually know what that person does. And there's situations where that's unavoidable, where you have like a non-technical person who's responsible for a technical person. So they sort of have to like take the technical person's word for it. That's going to take 90 hours to finish this code or this project or this program or whatever it is. But that ultimately is a problem in organizational structure where we have people who don't understand what their employees do responsible for their employees. And so they use poor systems like be in the office 40 hours a week to track their employees' performance or to evaluate it. And that just incentivizes the employee to get their stuff done quickly and then find a way to entertain themselves, right? Where they're like, look, I'm going to have to show up 40 hours a week. Doesn't mean I have to work for the 40 hours. So I'm just going to do what I have to. I think on the other side of that, that's where really building work around results matters the most, right? If you we have the example we use in this office, right? The Dwayne the Rock Johnson joke, which is, look, if you, Daniel, bring in Dwayne the Rock Johnson as a client, and he signs and he pays a fee, which, based on our model, his fee would probably be several $100,000, if not over $1 million. It'd be a huge, an absolutely remarkably enormous client for us. At that point, you can probably take the whole year off because you have done more business development in a day than we have in the entire history of our firm, right? So, like, good for you. You have accomplished your objectives. But at some point, we'll have to ask you to come back, right? Like, you don't get a free pass forever. But if you said, like, I signed him, we're good, he's good, I'm going to take the next 2 months off and play a lot of golf, I'd be like, more power to you, man. Good job. Because the results are there. But conversely, if you said, Dan, I'm going to spend 60 hours a week in the office all week, every week until I have hit an objective, and you never hit the objective, then all I'm going to do is feel bad for you and be like, what are you doing, man? And this becomes a coaching, training, management thing. But like, at some point, putting in a bunch of time to have no outcome or to have a bad outcome is not worth it. So I think some of the questions around, are you missing out on culture? Are you not developing skills? Those are valid. I think those are actually real business concerns and considerations where some companies are like, hey, our young employees don't know anything because for the last 4 or 5 years they worked remotely and they don't learn anything and nobody's mentoring them. But again, that's a management problem that's poorly solved by saying you have to come into the office every single day of the week. On the other side, though, if your culture is so poorly executed that you can't trust people to be productive and learn things and develop their skills and so on when they're remotely, that's a problem with culture. I think a great statement of culture is what happens when you're not around. Right. So for me, if you're working from home or if I'm not in the office, culture is going to dictate whether you guys are productive or whether you all find ways to fuck off for the time that I'm not around. And if I can figure out that you're fucking off, then it becomes my responsibility to make you busier and to empower you to be more productive with your time. And if you're being productive with your time, which I think everybody on the team is, then mission accomplished. The culture is doing what it's supposed to.
Okay. I think a lot of that makes sense, and there's nothing there I wouldn't agree with. But let's say I'm going to use Google for an example for no other reason that it came to my mind, and you're a software developer, and they say you can work from home, and it seems like it's a permanent mandate. So cool, I can work remotely. And let's say you live 30 minutes from the office at present, and you want to move 2 hours away. At any point in time, Google can change their mandate, and if there's not an office close to that 2 hour, radius where you now move to, you're screwed. Is this a risk, or even things people should consider if they have a remote job and take into consideration the risks of potentially having that mandate changed?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, 100%. I think there are situations where that risk is harder to forecast. So you gave the example, you're working on campus somewhere. They say you can work it from home or you can work remotely going forward. You're like, cool, I'm going to move up to the mountains or somewhere fun that I want to live. You are deliberately taking on a risk, but that risk is not even entirely in your control because, yes, you moved, but also the company could close your campus. They could just eliminate your division, your position. They could fire you for cause or for no cause, right? They could just let you go. So that's always a risk, and I don't know that you want to pick your geography based around like, oh, what if my company makes a change? I think you have to acknowledge though that if you move from Boulder, Colorado, Denver, Colorado, Silicon Valley to the middle of, pardon my French, fucking nowhere, that then if you lose your job, if your division gets shut, if you're laid off, whatever happens, you've moved to the middle of nowhere. And that means your job opportunities are only going to be with other opportunities that permit remote work. And so there's always going to be a risk about not being close. There's two particular things that come to mind here as specific examples. One, Peter Thiel, who I think is a despicable human being. That's my opinion, but I'm going to use him as an example anyway. Peter Thiel famously, when Palantir was first opened, would pay employees bonuses if they lived within half a mile of the office. He would literally pay them more to be within essentially, like a 2-minute commute distance from the office, because then the trade off for him was he could pull people in pretty much at will and say like, hey, I need you in the office right now, and know that they had no excuse realistically if they were at home to not be there in like 5 minutes. So there's certain examples like that where sometimes there can be an incentive or a reason to be close to the office, but again, recognizing the office can move. The other example that comes to mind here, and this is where I say that said earlier, the risk is sometimes harder to hedge, is some companies say, we're a remote company, right? Like, I work out of my house, you're going to work out of your house. Everybody we ever recruit is going to be a virtual remote employee. And some companies thrive doing that. And there's whole tech platforms that support that sort of thing. But there's always the arbitrary choice that somebody could say, you know what? I've decided we're going to open an office somewhere, and you have, 2 months to move there, right? Or by the time we open the office, you need to be there, or you need to get a different job. So I'll think of a media company. What is it? The Daily Wire, which is like all the Ben Shapiro conservative type people. Like they used to be based in LA, and then one day they said we're moving to Nashville. So every employee who lived in LA had to move to Nashville or lose their job. Essentially, I assume maybe there were some remote allowances, but like that's a whole company just saying, hey, we're moving. Magpul used to be in Erie, Colorado. And then years ago, Colorado passed a magazine gun control law in Colorado, and Magpul said, well, literally, our product is now illegal in the state we manufacture it in, so we're gonna move. We're gonna move up to Wyoming. Or you have, even in our industry, in the financial industry, Potomac, which is a fund investment company, was founded essentially as a 100% remote company, and the owner a couple of months ago came out and said, hey, I bought a building in, I think, like Maryland or DC, somewhere around the DC area. Everybody gets to move there and work there in person going forward, or you can get a new job. It's like that's always a risk. There's always a geographical risk. You can't control it. But when you deliberately make a decision to relocate away from the office, away from the physical facility, you are personally choosing to increase that risk for yourself. That risk could be worth it, right? The work-life balance, the quality of life, your family composition might make it worth doing that. But just be mindful that there are no guarantees. Everybody functionally is some version of an at-will employee in some way, shape, or form, and that every job is only as secure as the company's willingness to maintain it and the market's willingness to support the company's ability to maintain it.
I'd assume it also probably you have to weigh what your job is. As you said earlier, if you work for a results-driven firm or company or industry, you have to think about that. It might be more feasible for you to work from home compared to somebody who's trying to build a culture and provide motivation to a team or whatever the case may be. But yeah, I like the way you frame that, and that it is a risk, and you do increase that risk. But every job has risks, and if you start weighing them all and trying to eliminate them, you're just going to drive yourself a little crazy.
I'll also just note, and this is maybe the most unfair component of the working in office versus working from home thing, but human beings are human beings, and so visibility does matter from a career management standpoint. I think that's one of the biggest risks you take being a remote is that it's hard to get yourself in front of the people who control your career, at least within your current company or your organization. But I'll even take that like in a localized sense. For the 3 years that I worked at IBM before I started my practice, I would like to say that I had essentially zero connection to the Longmont community other than living there. Like I could go to the Roost or the Pump House, I could go to dinner somewhere, go to the gym or something, but like I don't think I could really honestly say that I like knew anybody in the community. And today, I would say that it's hard for me to go anywhere without running into somebody I know. The same thing can sort of apply in the context of your job. It's easy to be a good worker and get decent performance evals and so on, but if you're not regularly in front of your boss or your supervisor or your boss's boss, it's hard to be visible for opportunities. I remember again back to working at IBM. There was a point at which I had been the only person working on a project or sorry, one of the only two people working on a project for several months, and then an opportunity came to essentially become the team lead or the supervisor for that project when it was done, and I interviewed for it. And my counterpart, my partner on this project, also interviewed for it. And there was two potential seats for this particular role or this particular program. And it just happened to be that our manager, the one who'd been running our program, who would be in charge of the program when the actual thing happened or came to fruition, decided to take a vacation the same week that the interviews were supposed to happen. And so they outsourced it to one of their coworkers, another manager at their level. And that manager, surprise, surprise, interviewed us, interviewed a couple other people from their own team, and the two people they picked were from their own team. Because even though we had been on this project, putting in the time, all of this, those people had visibility for that leader. And so that leader evaluated us based on our interview, and I'm sure we interviewed just fine, but evaluated their people not only on the interview they'd done with them and their qualifications, but also then on knowing what their performance was on their own team and wanting to advocate for them. And so that's one of the challenges of being remote. If you've got a really strong remote culture where being remote's not a big deal in your company, that's fine. But if there's a hybrid hierarchy where there are people who work in office and there's some people who work from home, don't be surprised if the people in office tend to get a lot better treatment as far as evaluations, promotions, and opportunities because they're visible to the right people. And that's not fair, it's not equitable, but that is one of the risks that happens when you're out of sight, out of mind, when your personality or your presence in your organization is just your chat messages in Teams or something like that or Slack. You don't have the opportunity to build the same rapport with the people who ultimately will be picking people for that next task, that next assignment, or the next project.
That's a really good point. And to finish up on that, I can even use a personal experience there. My last firm was almost fully virtual, and now I work 90% of my time in person. Sometimes I'll work off site or at home. And even just the micro interactions between meetings, or when I walk in the morning or when we go to grab lunch, are sometimes invaluable in the conversations we have or the interactions that we share that you simply don't get when, like you said, you give me an assignment or we're chatting via Teams or a web conference. And there's a certain amount of that you just can't replicate on a computer screen.
Well, and in that particular sense, again, I think there are some companies that have really strong remote cultures. But even something like being on camera on Zoom versus just being like the black box with the name, I think is helpful, right? Because again, it's hard to empathize with the black box or to speak into the void, as it were. And I know we all love to like have our Zoom uniform where we have like a dress shirt on top and like gym shorts on the bottom. But at the end of the day, it's worth literally showing up and being visible in that context because it may not be the thing that ever determines your fate or the outcome of something, but I don't think you're ever going to lose points for showing up and being visible on your team so long as you're actually a good worker whose attention is being gathered because they're a good worker, as opposed to being visible because you're the person that the manager is out to get because your performance is terrible.
Easy enough. Well said.
And in that regard, Daniel, you don't have to work 90% in person. I think you quite literally choose to show up an hour early every day.
It's all in good fun. I like it here.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. I guess
The
on
view's
that
not too
point,
bad.
the view's not too bad, except when it's snowing and overcast and you can't see the mountains. But otherwise, yeah, it's a pretty good view. All right. Well, with that, I will go ahead and hand it off to you, sir. What is it that you have learned in the last couple of weeks that you think is valuable for our audience to hear or learn about?
Gearing up for tax season here is a common theme I'm noticing between some of our quote unquote more successful or engaged clients versus maybe some of those who tend to put things on the back burner, and whatever the case may be, maybe they have more issues arise, etc. It seems to be a common theme that clients that get more out of the relationship or simply have better financials or maybe achieve more also are proactive. And it's not just proactive getting tax documents or finding a tax preparer. It's being proactive in everything. It's their preparation for meetings. It's the way they approach their job, I'd assume, and it kind of trickles into other aspects of their life. It's just being proactive and a certain level of preparation and urgency that goes into the completion of tasks or assignments or even their thoughts for what they want to do 5, 10 years from now. And I think it's a skill that we can all control to a certain degree, and definitely a theme among some of our better folks we work with.
The Science of Wealth is produced by My Wealth Planners, a registered investment advisor in Colorado. The theme song is This Is Your Time by Dan Phillips. The podcast is intended for educational purposes only and is not investment advice or any other form of advice. Not all material discussed on the podcast is appropriate for every individual in every circumstance, so you should consult with a certified financial planner, tax professional, or legal professional as appropriate before attempting to apply any of the subjects, strategies, or tactics discussed on the podcast.